Good morning, everyone. Just wanted to make sure that we welcome everyone to the meeting this morning. So this is the Law Enforcement Ad Hoc Committee meeting. Just wanted to remind everybody that the meeting is being recorded. So if you have any concerns with that, be sure to let us know. But we wanted to start this morning with, and I apologize, my screen is not advancing, so I'm trying to do that real quick. There we go. I wanted to start a little bit with the structure of the meeting. First, thank you for joining us. We had a great meeting a couple of weeks ago. Really enjoyed everyone's input, and I thought that we had some really good dialogue. So thank you very much for being here. I know that you have a lot of things to do on Saturday morning, but this is the best thing you can do. So really appreciate everyone joining us. So as you know, everyone will be admitted to the meeting, but you'll be placed on mute, and your video will be turned off unless you're called on to speak. And if you're called on to speak, and again, sometimes we miss people with the mute button. So if we miss you and there's some background noise, feel free to mute yourself. To ask a question during the question periods, you can use the raise your hand icon on Zoom or press *9 if you're on the phone. And then be patient. As you know, some of these Zoom meetings, they're great, but they're a little bit difficult as well at times. So appreciate your patience. Councilmember Spriggs is going to, what he was going to do is kind of give us a summary of what happened in our last meeting. And we'll move forward to that. And then we'll move back to the Mayor Pro Tem, who can introduce our consultants. So Councilman Spriggs, let me move forward to that slide so that you can do that. And we will let you give us a summary from the last meeting. Thank you.
Go. Good. Well, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll get that sorted out. As you mentioned, Mr. City Manager, you know, these Zoom meetings are almost always fraught with some sort of technical difficulty. It kind of reminds me of our when you're doing a PowerPoint in front of a large audience, something always goes wrong. So, yeah, I think we're all used to that, and we'll all be patient. I think we had a very good meeting previously. And that was 2 weeks ago today. Great attendance like today. And we discussed, obviously, from the screen, you can see the timeline where we've got to pull together a report by September 16. We had decided that we would have a total of 5 community meetings, this being the second one. And there'll be 3 more after this. And we thought originally they would deal with subjects in a certain sequence. The first one being the sheriff's contract, but the budget implications, and so that we all would start from the same platform regarding our knowledge of what sheriff services we get and what they cost, etc. Today, we're going to take a deeper dive into the sheriff services and the structure of those services and the number of sheriffs assigned to Imperial Beach, that sort of thing. We'll get to that later. We had also planned today on having a full discussion on sheriff's use of force. And we will have a partial discussion of that because we've not received all of the Imperial Beach specific data that we had requested from the sheriff. So it'll take us probably a little bit more time. We're going to continue parts of that discussion to our next meeting or the one after that. We also want to have a discussion on alternative services that could be used in lieu of armed deputies. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well, because the vast majority, as we will see shortly, of the sheriff's dispatch calls are not for violent crimes and for various other kinds of services. Then we're going to, in our 4th and 5th meetings, we were hoping to review a first draft and then a second draft right before the council meeting on the 16th. We may, considering the amount of time it's taking to collect the information that we need for analysis by ourselves and our consultants, we may only have one such meeting to review the draft. instead of 2. But in any event, and I think Mayor Pro Tem as well, are absolutely determined that we are going to come up with some kind of a report for the City Council. It may have gaps, but we're not going to postpone producing that report and delivering it to the City Council, hopefully with all of you present on the 16th of September. That will include the best findings and recommendations that we can make. Now, one last thing I'd like to point out that we talked about last time is, for those of you who weren't there, there was a very revealing pie chart that the city manager presented that included all of the major expenditure items in the city budget. And for most of you, this is going to be redundant. But public safety, out of our $21 million general fund budget, public safety is about $11.5 million, and the sheriff's contract is about $8 million of that. So you can see that public safety is over 50% of our budget, and the sheriff's contract is the overwhelming portion of that. We talked about the trends in the budget and the fact that we've had to make budget reductions and eliminate some key positions, go into reserves, etc., in order to balance our budget, which we are required to do by state law. We mentioned that for several years now, the City Council has been grappling with the question of insufficient growth of revenue to keep up with cost of public services, particularly public safety. So this moment in time is sort of the intersection of two major needs for our community. One is to get better control over the cost of sheriff services. And secondly, and this is related, and maybe we can really get a synergy out of this. The second is, are those sheriff services being used for for the things where they are have the best advantage for trained armed deputies versus other personnel? So by examining these factors in the context of use of force and other requirements and needs of the community, I think we're going to be able to come up with some recommendations that will be a win-win for this community. So that's sort of my summary of what we covered, and I think that brings us up to date.
Thank you, Councilman Spriggs, and we have good news. We are to the point where the Mayor Pro Tem can join us. So let me go back to the Mayor Pro Tem, who will talk about the consultants that have been chosen to help the ad hoc committee. And so we'll turn some time over to the Mayor Pro Tem. And sorry about that, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, but I believe you're on now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Apologies, everyone. I had tested my sound system and video. I don't know what happened, but thank you for your patience, and thank you for being here today on a Saturday. Again, Councilmember Spriggs gave a great overview of where how far we've come so far and where we will be going. So I just want to thank everybody for being here today. And I also want to announce with great pleasure that we have
What? What's going on?
Okay, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, I'm unable to hear her. I don't know if other people are able to hear.
Can you hear me now? It
I
said
can hear you.
someone muted
Yes,
me.
I can hear you now. Thank you. Yes.
I don't know if you muted me, but anyway. It's my great pleasure to announce that we have selected a consulting team, Dr. Keisha Clark and Mr. Michael Gray. Dr. Clark is a native of New Orleans, Louisiana, and was evacuated to California in 2005 due to Hurricane Katrina. She has also had the pleasure of being a resident of Imperial Beach. Dr. Clark provides leadership development for the County of San Diego, and educational background includes an undergraduate degree in psychology, a graduate degree in criminal justice, and a doctorate degree in management with a concentration in organizational leadership. Her areas of expertise are cultural competence, diversity, inclusion and equity, and trauma. She has worked on substance abuse and mental health services administration grants in San Diego, Florida, DC, Hawaii, and New Orleans. And as a result, was invited to speak at the national conference 2 years consecutively to address advocacy for African American communities disproportionately affected by mental health and justice systems. She has provided consultation to develop transformational leadership curriculum for San Diego City College and has helped Emory University incorporate mindfulness training in their curriculum. She has served as an adjunct faculty at Point Loma Nazarene University and Southwestern Community College, teaching criminology. She is a current online instructor for Indiana Wesleyan University, teaching human services and psychology. As a valued committee member of the Diversity and Inclusion Transformation Team, Cultural Competence Response Team, and Trauma-Informed Systems Integration Team, Dr. Clark has a wealth of resources and networks which broaden her craft. She serves as the president of the African American Association of County Employees and is the chairperson for the Employee Resource Group Council. She has published work in the field of resilience, and in her spare time, I don't know if she has any, she enjoys being involved in volunteerism that promotes community uplift. So thank you, Dr. Clark, for being here today, and I'd like to invite you to say a few words if you'd like.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm so sorry about the difficulties in the technology. I know how that can be very nerve-wracking. I went ahead and unmuted myself and started my video here. So it's great to see some of you. I've gone through the videos and I can see some of you all. Welcome. Thank you so much, 45 participants. I think that's a pretty healthy number to see the commitment and the dedication of this community, how important it is in the input. And I have been on the side of the citizens, the community, and am really excited to have this be a community-led thing. I saw on one of the slides that citizen input or resident input was the last dot point, but I'm convinced, just as we see in our Board of Supervisors kind of organizational chart, that the citizens should be at the top because you are the ones, your family members, your neighbors, are the ones that are the recipients of either great community relations with your law enforcement officials or victims of it. And so I really look forward to engaging and using my background in social services and human services to integrate something in the community with law enforcement. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Dr. Clark. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Next, I'm going to introduce our second consultant, Mr. Mike Gray. He is the Executive Director of the Government Training Agency in San Diego. He is active in the executive and management functions of the GTA and runs day-to-day operations, including being involved in training and consulting. Mike is retired from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, and during his career there, worked on a number of assignments, gaining a broad range of experience in law enforcement. Mike has and is currently working with several California state programs specializing in criminal investigations and instructor development, as well as special projects such as de-escalation. Mike has earned a bachelor's degree in business management and a master's in organizational leadership. Mike is a board member of the San Diego County Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board, which reviews complaints and death investigations involved in the San Diego County Sheriff's Department and Probation Department. I don't believe Mr. Gray has joined us yet, but we welcome you to the team. And again, I want to thank everybody for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to Councilmember Spriggs. Thank you so much.
So Madam Mayor Pro Tem, while we were working your technical difficulties, we were able to have Councilman Spriggs give his opening remarks. And so unless he has some additional, and feel free to cut me off if you do, Councilman Spriggs, we'll move right to the agenda and move the meeting along. So
Great, let's do that.
Oh, sorry. Okay, great. Thank you. So we wanted to go over a little bit so that people knew what we were talking about, and we really appreciate everyone's flexibility. We're going to have to be a little bit fluid as we go through this. We were going to concentrate today on use of force, and we will talk somewhat to that issue, but we were unable to get a lot of information that we're still trying to get from the Sheriff's Department. But what we did want to do is make sure that we did a review of the current Sheriff's Department contract, how it is created, kind of the cost breakdown of that Sheriff's contract so that everyone has an idea of how the Sheriff's contract works in Imperial Beach. We wanted to also talk about the crime data that we do have for the city of Imperial Beach and how it's specific in our community so that as we go through this process, we can certainly right-size the services and make sure that we are creating the most safe environment that we can possibly have in our community. And then, as I mentioned, we would have a basic overview of use of force. So let me, again, move forward to the Sheriff's contract. So the contract is created. 9 of the 18 cities in San Diego County contract with the County Sheriff's Department for their police services. And you can see there that it's Del Mar, Encinitas, Lemon Grove, Poway, San Marcos, Santee, Solana Beach, Vista, and Imperial Beach. So half of the cities in the county contract with the San Diego Sheriff's Department. A negotiating team of 3 or 4 managers or assistant managers negotiates a proposal for the cities, and then each city presents that to the elected officials for consideration. So the contract that is used in Imperial Beach is the same contract that is used in the other 8 communities that receive their police services from the San Diego Sheriffs. Imperial Beach is beginning now our 3rd year of a 5-year contract. And so the last time the contract was negotiated, it was negotiated to be a 5-year contract, and we are in year 3 of that contract. And the contract is based on a menu that is consistent for all 9 cities. So a deputy in Imperial Beach costs the same amount that it would in Solana Beach, and a sergeant costs the same in Imperial Beach as it might in Poway. So hopefully that gives you some idea of how the contract is created. But if you look at our specific contract here in Imperial Beach, you'll see that the first service category there is patrol deputy, which is our patrol officers. Each patrol officer costs $197,000, and we have 11 patrol officers. And so you can see the net cost there off to the right. We have traffic deputies next, and we have 2 traffic deputies. We have special purpose officers, and I used FY20 because we're just beginning FY21. So this is a review basically of the fiscal year that ended June 30th. So a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago, this was the personnel that we had in the Sheriff's Department. I put an asterisk there by the special purpose officers because one of our special purpose officers we will not have in FY21, which is the school resource officer. So that's what that asterisk is on the special purpose deputies. Then you can see that we have 3 detectives. Each detective is about $206,000. And then we have community service officers. Now, community service officers are non-sworn positions, but they are employed by the Sheriff's Department. And then you can see the sergeant positions. There's a patrol sergeant, a traffic sergeant, and a detective sergeant. We have, excuse me, we have 2 patrol, but just over 2, almost 2.1 patrol sergeants. And that's because we share some time of the patrol sergeants with the unincorporated area of Bonita. And that's why you see that kind of unusual number there. And then we have a traffic sergeant here in Imperial Beach and 0.6 of a detective sergeant. Again, that 0.6 is that we share that position with the unincorporated area of Bonita. And then there's station staff, which includes a lieutenant and his staff. And we, again, that's the 0.6. We share that with the unincorporated area of Bonita. So in Imperial Beach, we have 23, almost 24 sworn officers, and those personnel costs are about $5.6 million. The overhead costs, the ancillary support that we provide to the Sheriff's Department, again, this is all through the contract and consistent for all of the cities. Our pro rata share of that overhead for ancillary support, supply, vehicles, the space for the department, management support and liability is about $2 million. So when you add those two together, the sheriff's contract costs in Imperial Beach for the personnel are about 5.6, the overhead about 2, so you're right about $7.5 million, and that was in FY21. I'm sorry, FY20. As you heard Councilman Spriggs earlier mention, $8 million. The increase in the Sheriff's Department for FY21 will raise that to just about exactly $8 million. So we wanted to stop there and make sure that the council members didn't have any questions, or the public didn't have any questions about how the sheriff contract in Imperial Beach is made up, or and hopefully that gives people a little bit better understanding. I get a lot of questions. Well, you know, how do you hire or work with the Sheriff's Department? So hopefully that gives you a little bit better overview about how the sheriff's contract works. And I will look to the city clerk to see if we have any questions that are coming up on the screen.
Andy, this is Councilmember Spriggs. I just wanted you to clarify one point. I think you mentioned it 2 weeks ago, and that is the comparison between Imperial Beach's sheriff costs and that of other sheriff contract cities. We've looked at that, and essentially our per capita costs seem to be pretty much in line with the others at this point in time. Is that correct? Or if not, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I could pull up that other screen. I could probably do that. It might take me a minute, and we can do that even if you wanted to during some of the other questions. But essentially, that's correct, Councilmember Spriggs. Sworn officers per 1,000 people. Imperial Beach is literally just about right in the middle. Del Mar, of course, has the highest, and then some of the larger cities, and I think that comes down to economies of scale. San Marcos and Vista have fewer, but again, I think as much as anything, that's economies of scale. So the smaller communities like Imperial Beach and Del Mar and Solana Beach do have higher officers per 1,000. That is correct. And there are some questions. And so we'll let the city clerk unmute people and let them ask their questions.
Okay, the first question is a chat question from Indigo Curtis. And her question is, wow, I still don't quite understand why people in IB often say we only have 2 to 4 sheriffs.
Okay.
The
Early, but we could still go in the morning.
The next question is from Jenny Nesbitt. Can you give an example? Can you please, attention, mute yourself, please? Thank you. Jenny Nesbitt asks, can you give an example of what a schedule would look like for these patrol officers?
So, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Spriggs, maybe I can try to answer both of those at the same time. When we hear that there are only 2 patrol officers in Imperial Beach, the sheriff, what that means is that there are only 2 patrol officers on duty at one time. Let me go back on my screen a little bit, and you'll see that we have the 11 patrol officers in order to staff for 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, of course. We typically in Imperial Beach have 2 patrol deputies on duty at all times. There are times when there are more. There's times when there are 3 and possibly even 4. And then the traffic deputies, as you see 2 there, that means that they aren't necessarily 24 hours a day. So Indigo, I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, be sure to raise your hand or send in another question. The second question is that most of our patrol officers work 12-hour shifts. So they're 12 hours on and then 12 hours. So they work 12-hour shifts. Some of the other office personnel, like detectives, the lieutenant, and some of those actually work 8-hour shifts, and they're mostly working hour shifts. So, you know, the typical 8 to 5 working hour shifts. So again, it's hard to see when I'm staring at a screen and not getting any feedback. I'm not sure that I'm answering your questions. So if I don't, and you need to clarify, feel free to ask another question. And Madam Clerk, I saw a hand raised. I don't know if you're seeing. Okay, good. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
There is a hand raised by Jack Fisher. You're able to speak. You need to unmute yourself, please.
Can you hear me, Doctor?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hey, so Andy, my question was, if we are having similar contracts to other communities in San Diego County, have you spoken to those community leaders to see if they're struggling with the increased cost associated with having the sheriff's department contracted? And if so, would it be possible to create a collaborative bargaining team to go into the sheriff's and just try to even it out? I'm not saying that they're doing anything unfair towards the city of Imperial Beach, but perhaps a little bit more power from the collective might be a good way to negotiate.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Yes, we have been in contact with other cities in the county. And of course, all cities are struggling with the costs of law enforcement. Law enforcement is very, very, very necessary and very,
okay.
very expensive.
Oh, yeah.
Jackie, can I get you to mute just for 1 second while I'm doing this? Thank you. Not a problem. And so, yes, we've had an opportunity to talk to some of the other cities. And in fact, a little bit later in the presentation, in fact, in the next section of the presentation, you'll see that the sheriff has even suggested that perhaps we can share some employees with some of our neighboring sheriff contract cities, for instance, Lemon Grove. And there has been some initial conversations about whether or not we might be able to get some economies of scale by sharing with some of those other communities. So yes, those are ongoing, and I think that that is an excellent question. One of the real challenges for Imperial Beach in terms of sharing is that we are surrounded by communities that have their own police departments. So Coronado, the city of San Diego, Chula Vista, and National City all have their own police departments. But we are looking at if there's some economies of scale that we could have working with some other people in the south end of the county, such as Lemon Grove. So that's a real good question. Hopefully that answered it.
Okay, the next person that has a question is Julie Barrons. Julie, please unmute yourself.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi, okay. So I think my question, it's not more of a, less of a question, more of a statement. I have several run-ins with the sheriff's department on a daily basis. It really is part of our everyday life. Personally, as a resident here in Imperial Beach, I live on 8th and Donix, and there is a very well-known drug ring happening just on Delaware and on 8th Street. So drug dealers are constantly running drugs between them too. And I have a small child. So when you're talking about potentially cutting the amount of police, you're essentially, to me, saying that I have less of a chance of a sheriff responding to my house when I feel like my life is in danger, when I feel like my daughter's life is in danger. And this isn't just about drugs. This is about police doing a full-on raid in the back of our in our backyard, searching for this individual who went missing on his ankle bracelet, because he's on an ankle bracelet, and he was hiding in our backyard and in our neighbor's backyard. And at 12 in the morning, they found him, but we were stuck in our house, literally locked ourselves in our bathroom in order to feel safe, because this individual was missing and he was hiding in our backyard until the sheriff's department was eventually able to recover him. So when you talk about, you know, kind of maybe getting rid of a few sheriffs, that doesn't necessarily sit well with me. It also seems like the city is maybe struggling to, pay the sheriffs, which is something that's understandable. However, it seems as though they are using this opportunity. They're using the Black Lives Matter movement in order to initiate the ability to pay them less, which isn't sitting well with me. Obviously, because if you want the Imperial Beach of the past, then you take away the sheriffs, basically. I don't want the Imperial Beach of the past. I feel like we have made giant strides in the last 10, 15, 20 years, and that is because of the sheriffs. And if you ask any sheriff, if you have had interactions with them, as I have on a multiple basis, and I say, hey, what can we as a community do to support you? They say, more sheriffs. We need more support. And so taking away sheriffs is not an option. Not for our community, not as our community stands today, because these are issues that affect our community. They're safety issues that affect our community every single day. And that's all I have. Thank you.
I'd like to respond to that, and maybe Mayor Pro Tem would as well. It is absolutely this community's first priority, and I believe mine and the City Council's first priority to have sufficient public safety for our community. We are looking at a surgical approach to this issue based on the longstanding need to get our cost structure under control while maintaining sufficient sheriff boots on the ground to not have any negative impact whatsoever on community safety. One of the things that we are looking at is the number of non-lethal calls or non-violent dispatches far exceeds, and I think City Manager Hall is going to get into this, far exceeds the number of calls where an armed deputy is required, such as the situation you described in your neighborhood. There's absolutely no way that we want to reduce our sheriff's capability to respond to those kinds of needs in the community, where a sworn armed deputy is absolutely necessary, or even with some margin of error, most appropriate for that sort of situation. But there are many other situations where armed deputies have to respond that don't require that level of service, and that's really what we are exploring. So I think that the sentiment that Julie expressed represents a lot of people in our community. We don't want to see reductions in public safety where it really counts, and that's a message that we are going to take forward in everything that we do here to try to find the right balance between what kinds of personnel do we need to respond to the majority of situations in the community where the sheriffs are called, and is there a way to do this in a more economical manner?
Councilmember Spriggs, I want to echo what you were saying. Our first and foremost priority is to keep our community safe, and we discussed that at length at our last meeting, and happy to convey that again during this one. I believe that Andy either was planning on showing a slide, I'm not quite sure, but I just want to reiterate that any changes in our sheriff's contract doesn't necessarily would reflect less safety. In the past, we were doing some analysis of some statistics that we had in the past, and our level of crime went down right at the time that we had a couple of positions eliminated in the past. And I don't know if you have that data in front of you, Andy, but it doesn't necessarily always one equate to the other. But at the end of the day, again, I just want to say that the priority number one is to keep our community safe and to make sure that we have also the balance within our budget so that we can continue to provide services for our community that are so desperately needed. So I just want to mention that very briefly. So thanks.
Okay, this is City Clerk Kelly. The next speaker is Elizabeth Uremovic.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
Can you speak up just a little bit, please?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
Okay, to the previous commenter, you can get druggies out of your neighborhood through code compliance. That's in the planning department, has nothing to do with the sheriff's department. But what I would like to say about looking for cheaper means, economical means, our neighbor city, Coronado, does have their own police department. And they're going to have a very hard economic time because most of their revenue is generated from those hotels that are now not full. A easy combination might be to join with Coronado to make a Coronado IB police department. It would save Coronado from having to crash their police department. They already have everything in place. All they would need is a little setup in IB. And a couple guys over here, not a big deal. I think that might be something you guys could look at. It might be much cheaper for Imperial Beach, and it would also help Coronado, save on to their law enforcement. And it is already a complete setup. And that might be a more economic option, and it would bring us away from the sheriff's department that's a little predatory. Thank you.
Maybe just real quick on that, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, Councilman Spriggs. In the last meeting, we did discuss the potential of making sure that the part of this report has to be, what are the options that are available to the city? And you are correct. We have had some, at least initial conversations with other agencies in other cities, just to make sure that we are exploring all of our options. And we do that on a fairly regular basis. So that's a real good suggestion, and we will continue to do that. Thank you.
The next person is Marco Amaral. Mr. Amaral, please unmute yourself. Mr. Amaral?
Yes, hello.
Hello.
First and foremost, buenos dias, good morning, everybody. In Lakesh, you are more than me, I am more than you. If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. I have a couple questions, a question and a couple concerns. First, why are community service officers not sworn? What does that mean to not be sworn? And what's the justification, given the relatively little training that officers get in general as it is? My concern is, why is a non-sworn officer getting $86,000 a year? But first and foremost, what does non-sworn mean? And then second, there is absolutely no correlation between more officers and less crime. Quite often, the very opposite is true. The issue of drugs, as we know, is shown by many studies. The issue of drugs is a multifaceted issue that has to do a lot with socioeconomics, international politics, and racism as it is. I think it's important for us. I'm not sure if it was addressed at the last meeting, but I think in general, I just wanted to say that it is important for us to recognize that we're having this conversation in large part because there is a national discussion around how the police force is an institution grounded and founded on the ideas of white supremacy. And I think that we need to acknowledge that and then move forward from there, independently if you think that that's an issue today. I think we're here today because we understand that that has been an issue, that is an issue institutionally of the past, and that is something that is rooted in the institution. And that's it. So if someone can please answer the community service officer not sworn question, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Assistant City Manager Cortez. Thank you for being here, taking the time of your Saturday morning. I actually going through some of the chat questions, and I can address a few. I know we have some raised hands, which will give them an opportunity to speak and ask questions as well. But because the CSO question was part of the chat, I can address that, and I'll address a couple other ones as well. So basically, the CSOs have less responsibilities, and that's why they're not sworn officers, fewer responsibilities and fewer qualifications. There was a question about the cost, and it is all in costs, basically. There are other questions about overtime. Just want to clarify that the overtime cost, it is not part of the budget. That is an additional cost for a sheriff, and overtime is as needed, like any employee, you know, even in the city of Imperial Beach. The next question was, how do we determine that we need 11 officers instead of 8 or 9? That is so we can have 2 officers at all times. Do Imperial Beach officers respond to calls in Bonita and Lemon Grove? No, in Lemon Grove, only in Bonita. And the last question is the comparison of a 1 officer to a lifeguard or firefighter. This is a very broad question because you know, our lifeguards start at a lower class, and then, you know, they promote and they become lieutenants. So it's anywhere between 50 to 60K on a full-time entry-level lifeguard. And a firefighter, again, it's a little different to compare apples to apples because we have firefighters, we have engineers, and we have captains. But a very good approximate range would be between $75K and $125,000. So with that, I'll pause there, and we'll continue to review the questions in the chat. And Jackie, City Clerk Kelly will prompt the rest of the race questions.
This is Ed. I just wanted, Councilmember Briggs, I just wanted to make a point about the CSO and the other salaries that we saw on an earlier slide. Those salaries reflect, I believe, the cost of benefits and retirement for each of those officers. So that's the total compensation package. So a CSO at whatever it was, 86,000, I believe, doesn't reflect just the pay, but also the whole package of benefits. Erica, if that's not true, you can come back in and correct me. I think we need to explore the CSO because it's so much less expensive, and even though they are not sworn, the CSOs could very well be, with more exploration as to their duties and potential capabilities, they could be respondents to many of the other situations that don't require a sworn officer with a sidearm in the community. But that's something we'll have to examine in terms of what the total volume of response situations are for the sheriff that don't require an armed sworn deputy, and whether the CSOs can fill any of that gap. I think that is one of the areas that we need to inquire into, and that we will, to see if there's an overlap between some of those needs and the capabilities of CSOs, even with potentially enhanced training. Thank you.
The next person up is Jenny Nesbitt. Jenny, please unmute yourself.
Hi there. Good morning. My question is actually for a little background. Can you explain to me, since I'm new in this, rather new in this community, why our own department in Imperial Beach was disbanded and why we decided in the end to go with the Sheriff's Department?
Thank you for that question. I think that there's probably a lot of reasons, but I think the primary overriding reason was that we had talked a little bit earlier about the economies of scale and how difficult it is to have a small department, because you still need to have the capabilities of detectives and hazmat teams and SWAT teams and some of those kinds of things with some of the things that the communities are facing these days. And so I believe that at some point in time, the overriding reason was that it was easier to join together with some of the other communities in the county and receive those services from the sheriff's department, and rather than try to gear up our department to be able to handle all of those. For instance, in some of the smaller cities that have their own police department now, they also have services that they receive from the county sheriff's department. They just pay for those extra when they need a SWAT team or maybe a drug enforcement team or some of those kinds of things. So again, it's been quite a while. I will freely admit that I don't know all the reasons. I was not with the city when that decision was made. There may be others that have more information than I do, but it's my understanding that primarily it was a financial decision.
Okay, thank you.
Next up is Peter Lazes. Mr. Lazes?
Yes, good morning. My thinking on this is that there's several ways to approach it. One is to look at the unit cost of the officers. Can you reduce that 197,000 down to 180 or 175, which I think will ultimately not really be that satisfying. I think the biggest area to make significant gains are to change the mix between community service officers and patrol officers, since there's such a huge price difference there. Or look at a way to really think out of the box and use lifeguards or firefighters in some kind of a dual role possibility, because I think they're much cheaper as well. So I think we could look at combined with Coronado, I think it's really going to change the price, maybe 197 to 196 or 185. It's still going to be a lot, but I think the real big gains can be made by changing the mix of officers to CSOs, or by really thinking and trying to double duty some of the lifeguards or firefighters. Now, there's all kind of other issues with those, but I think that's one area that needs to be looked at, is how can we really sort of think out of the box and maybe change the way we think about this. But with the CSOs, the question I'm looking forward to hear more about is how much response calls may start as something that's benign, a noise complaint, but then escalates into something where a patrol officer was needed, whereas a CSO might not have been able to escalate himself on the spot. So those are also my thoughts on where we're headed. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. That's a good question. Let me answer the first part of your question, which is, is there a way to reduce the cost for each officer? Again, the sheriff provides to us the amount that it costs for each service person, whether that's a patrol officer, a traffic officer, a sergeant, detective, and that is uniform across the 9 cities in the county. So I don't know that we would individually be able to, in fact, I've asked that question before, individually as a city have a different price in Imperial Beach for officers than they do in other communities, and the sheriff has told us they're not interested in doing that. In terms of the lifeguards and maybe the fire department doing more of the law enforcement in the community, there's no doubt that they already participate in a lot of the law enforcement things in the city. And that's probably the heart of this conversation is, as we all want the safest community possible. I know I do. And so what's the best way to tackle that? And you're right, there might be some things that we can do on the lifeguards to make sure that the waterfront is a safe place that doesn't always require sheriff response, because we have some amazing lifeguards, very qualified, and they do a great job in a lot of their law enforcement duties down at the waterfront now. But no, those are really great points. But I did want to point out that I don't think that we would ever be given the opportunity to negotiate the price of individual positions with the sheriff's department, their uniform across the 9 cities.
So Andy, how frequently can we change the mix? If we wanted to say make it 5 patrol officers and say 8 community service, can we do that like next week, or we have to do it on once a year?
So typically they tell us that we need to make those changes by May 1st of each year. So you can make them annually so that they go into effect July 1st. They just follow the fiscal year. This year, when we went into this very ad hoc committee, we had made contact with the sheriff's department. We said we're asking whether or not you could give us an extension on making those decisions for FY21, and they gave us the 90 days. They gave us the 90-day extension. That's why we are confined to this time period and trying to have this discussion with the community so that we can get with the Sheriff's Department and pick the personnel that will serve Imperial Beach off of that menu that I had talked about earlier. So it's to answer your question directly, it's annually, and we need to make that decision by May 1st.
Okay, next up is Juan Navarez. Mr. Navarez, please unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Juan Navarez. I live in Imperial Beach here in the community of Siesta RV Park. As you guys know, we have been going through a lot of things. And one of the things that we went through is having lots of, like you guys have been saying, like druggies and bad people in our community. And the way that we got rid of everybody was to make a coalition of neighbors and started making reports on what was going on and trying to get people to get move elsewhere. And I think that's what we got to do in Imperial Beach. It's not about having more officers. It's not about having more money thrown into having people outside with guns. I think it's more of a community thing. Hopefully every one of you guys can have at least 10 numbers of your neighbors so you guys could be in contact, and you guys could go into the Sheriff's Department and actually have a good conversation with them. And I think that the way to do this is to think out of the box and not necessarily think about having more officers and more people that could come into our neighborhood and change it when we can change it ourselves. We don't need other people to come in here and change it. If we can make some sort of group that we can make reports and go back to the sheriff and say where the hot points are at, and maybe we can move these bad people out of our neighborhood. That's my opinion, and I hope that we could use that. Thank you guys, and thank you guys for having me here today.
Okay, next up is Beatrice Blevins. Ms. Blevins, go ahead, please. Please unmute yourself.
Okay.
Thank
Hi,
you.
good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Thank you for having me. And I really like what Juan just said. I just have to say that that's great points and having community rally together. I had a couple of questions. My first question is on the overtime. How often does that occur? And the next one was on the sales tax. I was reading about, the mayor put something out last night, some literature, and I read about sales tax increase going towards children and senior services, which I'm completely on board for that. But then as I was reading further, it discussed the sales tax going towards responses by the sheriffs, in particular burglaries. So I wanted to get some more clarification on that. Will the sales tax increase go towards more law enforcement funding? So I just wanted, if somebody can please clarify, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So a couple of things there. Yeah, the overtime is typically for, excuse me, the overtime is typically for things like special events. When we have different celebrations that happen in the community and whatnot, and we need additional police patrol or traffic control or some of those kinds of things, that's typically when we get the overtime in the Sheriff's Department. Otherwise, the Sheriff's Department is pretty much staffed on a regular basis, and so it's not, the overtime isn't usually accrued on a daily basis. It's usually for special events. So that was a really good question. The one thing that I would like to do real quick though is I know that there are a lot of comments that are going on the chat, and I can't see them all because I'm sharing my screen, and our assistant city manager is writing all of them down, and we are going to get some answers, and perhaps towards the end of the meeting, or maybe the next time we take a break for questions, we can address some of those. But we want to make sure that we take the right time. There's been some questions about, how much, for instance, is a lifeguard cost or whatnot. We're we're not going to hide any of that information, but it'll just take us a few minutes to put it together. So we'll probably, after this round of questions, move on to the next section, because what I'm seeing in a lot of these questions will be answered in some of the next sections. But Ms. Blevins, I know that I answered the first part of your question, but I think I missed the second one. And while Jackie's unmuting you, I just want to make sure in the chat, there's a lot of chat about going back and forth, and people are using some pseudonyms. The reality is this is our community. We're all trying to make these, the fact that we're coming together, having these discussions is really, really healthy in our community, and everyone's opinion is not only wanted, it's needed. It's really important for us to understand everyone's points of view. I'm going to make a plea. If you want to scream, certainly scream at me. I work for all of you and I get paid to do it. I would just highly encourage you to be civil with each other, because everyone's opinion matters and everyone has an opportunity to share. And that's why we're having these meetings, and we really appreciate it. So anyway, with that, if you could get Ms. Blevins back on, because I don't think I answered the second part of her question, and I apologize.
That's okay, Andy. You have a lot on your plate. And I just want to add too, if we could try to focus on the issues here. I agree, Andy. I had a question earlier and it got lost in translation there. Let's just be adults and please just focus on what's important here, because that's what we're here for, is for our community. Anyway, so my other question was, last night I was reading information or an article that the mayor sent out about the sales tax increase. And it said it would go towards children's services, senior services, catastrophic responses, which is great. And I'm all for it, you know. However, it did mention that it would also, or I don't know, maybe you can clarify, but it had mentioned something about sheriff's response to burglaries. So my question is, if this sales tax increase passed, would it go towards funding more law enforcement services? So I was a little unsure and unclear with the article that the mayor put out last night. So if you don't mind explaining.
Yes, thank you for that. The sales tax, if the sales tax is voted in by the residents of the community, it would be used for the city council then would use that money and they would place it in the budget. One of the things that we have been doing is a survey of the community to find out what the residents believe is most important in the community. And all of the council members expressed that, if we had additional revenues, what they would really concentrate on are the priorities that were identified by the residents. And not surprisingly, the highest priorities of the residents are their own personal safety, whether that's maintaining 911 emergency coverage, safe and clean communities, and all the things that we're talking about this morning. And so that's really, really important, not only to the residents, but I think it's the highest priority of the council. If you talk to any of our council members, and I think the two that are with us this morning, both mentioned it this morning, that there's no higher calling for an elected official than keeping the residents safe. That's first and foremost always on everyone's mind. Our conversation this morning is, what's the very best way to do that? What is the best way for us as a community? Imperial Beach, which is unique from any other community on the planet. Every community is different. What's the best way for Imperial Beach to keep our residents safe? And that's really the basis of the meeting this morning. But a lot of people would say that an important factor in public safety is giving the children an opportunity to have a solid recreation program so that they are engaged in that type of activity instead of other types of activities. So I think, and again, I can't speak for the mayor, but I think what he was trying to say is that, keeping a community safe and keeping a community clean, the law enforcement plays a huge role in that, but so do our residents. And in the next section, you'll see Imperial Beach has really improved in terms of our crime rate, and that's really the residents and everybody working together. So again, the tax would be used for all city services. It would generate about $1.3 million to the city on an annual basis. Our current budget is about 21 million. So just to give you some economies of scale. One thing that I would say to this group that's really important is that now that the city council has determined that they have put a tax measure on the ballot for the residents to decide whether or not they want to have additional revenues in the community. Staff members on work time cannot promote or fight against those measures. And so so if I'm dancing here a little, it's because I need to stay as neutral as possible, because that's the law, and I believe that that's the right, I think the law is correct. And so that's why I'm not being real specific. So hopefully you'll understand why I'm being just as general as I can about that. But just, oh, sorry.
Andy, let me just footnote what you said, because as the city council voted unanimously for this measure, and I think that any elected official can say that we all support and believe we need the increased revenues for our community to provide the public services that this community needs and deserves, including public safety services. We are sworn to be the fiduciaries of the community from a financial standpoint. This is the second point. And our budget, if we hadn't been cutting city services, including some positions already, our budget would be in the red right now. And we have a non-sustainable budgetary situation. And the fastest growing element is the 5 to 6% annual increase in the sheriff's contract. So we need this tax measure in order to balance our budget and not make any further cuts in city services, and to be able to maintain a reasonable amount of sheriff services, in my opinion, as well. So there are a lot of things that this budget measure will be for, but the highest priorities will be maintaining Imperial Beach as a safe and great community to live in with the public services, including public safety, that we all need. And I think the next section that we need to go to is going to talk a little bit about the crime statistics for Imperial Beach. And we want to maintain a continuing downward trend that City Manager Hall will talk about when, as soon as we get a chance to move away from the questions and into the next part of this, because, you know, we're already over an hour into this session, and I hope we can get through the whole agenda and have additional things that the community can discuss and consider that we'd hope to get input from the community from today. Thanks.
Okay, we are taking one last question before we move on to the next section. Will Nemo, please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me, Jackie?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thanks for coming together again, members of the council, city staff. There were some concerns in the community that I wanted to address. I think Mr. Amaral proposed a question about community service officers, and I kind of have a unique perspective on that because I used to be a community service officer for a different agency, not the sheriff's department. But the community service officer's role as a civilian is really important, especially if they come from the community that they serve in, just like a law enforcement officer. They respond to nonviolent calls, really cold cases, things that don't require active pursuit of criminals. You can take fingerprints off of car burglary scenes and whatnot. But they, like another commenter stated, those calls can escalate to something else. A lot of those resources that are spent towards community service officers are great, but something that we haven't been talking about, which I wanted the city to explore a little bit too, something that I'm familiar with called the Psychiatric Emergency Response Team, or PERT. And those are clinicians that are certified by the state of California to ride in the patrol car with police officers and patrol deputies and respond to calls with mentally ill subjects, domestic violence incidents, things that require additional resources that law enforcement officers don't have. So in the greater narrative that we're talking about here, where we restructure our finances and try and better serve our community, I think we should potentially be exploring that in our budgetary analysis as well, to see if we can include some of those resources in our law enforcement contract. And those are my only comments. Thank you, folks.
Thank you very much for that question. And then there will be time certainly for some additional questions, but let me move on to the next section because I think it might answer some of the questions that have been raised. And so we wanted to do kind of a high level overview of the crime statistics here in Imperial Beach so that people understand, what's happening in our community rather than in other places. So again, this comes from Sandag and it's compiled mostly through the FBI crime statistics, which is the Criminal Justice Clearinghouse. And you can see that on the slide in the box there on the left-hand side, Imperial Beach violent crime rate is about 2.62 per thousand in population. The region, which is San Diego County, is about 3.4 per thousand in population. In terms of property crime, in Imperial Beach, we're about 12.12. We're about 12. And the region's property crime is 16.48. And you can see again in the box on the right-hand side, that just is a graphic representation, and it shows the individual ones where we have homicides and rape and robbery and aggravated assault. And you can see the ones that have gone up and the ones that have gone down a little bit. And moving to the second page of that, you can see here that, I think there's a difference there you can see between robbery and burglary, for example. One is a violent crime and one is a nonviolent crime. So these are now the nonviolent crimes: burglary, larceny, the motor vehicle theft. So basically about 61% of our burglaries are residential. 49%, this is a big number, 49%, half of the burglaries had no forced entry. So that's if someone leaves the window down on their car or leaves their door unlocked or whatever. So about half of those crimes maybe could be prevented. And that's where we want to make sure that we are doing as much public education as possible. And then you can see the other crime rates there. And I won't dive into those, but you can see down at the bottom, you can see where you can go for more information. And remember that this is being recorded. It will be placed on our website. So if you want to come back and look into that website and you want to go see the crime statistics in depth, you can do that. But I do wanted to go over, there was some questions about our service calls and how many calls our sheriffs respond to. So it's about 10,000 calls a year. You can see there the years between 2015 and 2020. There were 56,000 calls that were responded to by the Sheriff's Department. Now, these are the numbers that the Sheriff's Department gave us. So I want you to know that's the source of that. I should have put it on the screen. So of the 56,000 calls, about 5,500 of them were emergency calls. So about 10% are emergency calls, and then about 51,000 are non-emergency calls. So just want to make sure that people have a feel for about how many of those are emergency calls and how many are non-emergency calls. And so looking at the crime statistics here in Imperial Beach, you can see that on the left-hand side of the screen, it's the type of crime. You can see the violent crime of homicide, rape, robbery, aggravated assault, and then the property crimes of burglary, theft, auto theft. And so each year you can see, and again, these are the statistics that were provided to us from the Sheriff's Department for the Imperial Beach, for the city of Imperial Beach. So you can see the different rates there, and I won't go through each one, but at least it gives you an idea of the types of crimes that are happening here in our community. But you can see that in a given year, so we have a violent crime or a property crime essentially more than once a day. It's a little bit more than once a day there. You can see there's there was in 2015 about 450, in 2019 about 400, and you can kind of see the breakdown there. So the crime rate in Imperial Beach, this is what a lot of people were alluding to earlier. In 2010, we were one of the higher crime rate cities in the county. Since that time, we have dropped to, so far in 2020, we are the second lowest crime rate in the county. In 2019, we ended up as the third lowest crime rate of all the cities in the county. So that's positive news, and that has a lot to do with our residents. I think that Imperial Beach is a very close-knit community. We watch out for each other. And I think that that's really, really important. I think that keeping things tidy and nice, you know, we try really hard on the details like graffiti. I just have to really put a shout out to our graffiti team. Graffiti is a really tough thing, but it can lead to other things. Again, it's through small windows and doors is where bigger things come through. And so we really try to pay attention to the detail. And as we've done that, we have seen a decrease in our crime rate. But the sheriffs have played a huge role in that. We have had some really good lieutenants here that have really implemented some really good ideas. So again, the community working together with law enforcement is the reason why you see the decline in the crime rates in the community. Just as some comparisons so that you can see, these are the South Bay cities, the crime rates in the South Bay cities in 2019. And you can see them there on the screen. So Imperial Beach and Coronado are a little bit lower. Again, beach communities tend to have a slightly lower crime rate across the county and in our county. And this is not inconsistent in the South Bay either. So you can kind of see the crime rates there. So again, there were several questions that were having to do with our crime rates and you know what's happening in Imperial Beach. So so far there's no additional questions, and I could go. Maybe I'll turn some time over to the Mayor Pro Tem or Councilman Spriggs if they wanted to make any comments about those statistics. And again, this is just an overview. We will be working with our consultants to take a much deeper dive into there's volumes of information that are behind those few slides. And we'll be working with the consultants to see what that really means in Imperial Beach and bringing that back to this group. But we'll turn some time over to our elected officials. And if there are no other questions, we'll move on to the last section and then maybe we should do that and tie up all the questions at the end so that maybe we can start the discussion there. But I'll turn some time over to Mayor Pro Tem and see how she would like to proceed.
Thank you, Andy. I think I saw a question come through after you finished speaking relating to the information you just shared. I want to give everybody an opportunity to ask the questions.
Okay, this is City Clerk Kelly. There was a comment from Allison Hoover. Do we know if the Sheriff's Department is changing their menu to offer mental/social service type officers? Is there a discussion among Sheriff Gore and the departments to expand the menu to fit the needs where a sworn armed deputy is not?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, and I think it was brought up earlier. The county sheriff's department does have a psychological emergency response team, a part team that does deal with psychological and mental illness issues. Now, I've had some conversations with Commander Brown, who has been working with me from the sheriff's department to try and get as much information as we can to provide to our residents as we have this very important conversation. You know, the one thing that we forget to say, and I'm going to say it, I know that the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs said it at our last meeting, but we are, you know, other communities in the county aren't necessarily having this conversation. And so I really appreciate the fact that our community is really engaging in this conversation. I think it's important. It's the largest part of our budget. It is the most important thing in all the surveys that we had in our community is the personal safety and 911. So really appreciate all of this. But in conversations with Commander Brown, he recognizes that as the way that the society is dealing with things like homelessness and mental illness and some of those kinds of things, that the Sheriff's Department is going to have to evolve, and they are going to have more association with social workers and some of the people that are equipped to deal with some of those challenges that we are having in society these days. So yes, there are conversations going on with the Sheriff's Department, at least in terms of Imperial Beach. Now, as the city managers meet together with the Sheriff's Department, there has not been any county-wide discussion about this. This has been more conversations directly between myself and Commander Brown about how can we engage the services of, for instance, South Bay Community Services, which is another county entity And is there a way that we might be able to use some of those services that may be more cost effective that are also provided by the county, and make sure that we are addressing the needs of our individual community, and they are open to those types of conversations.
Andy, if I may, just to add,
Okay.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
just to point everyone's attention back to the number of non-emergency related calls. It's a striking number, right? 50,000 of those calls were non-emergency calls. So I think that just like Andy was mentioning right now, this leaves room for us to explore how can we ensure that a lot of these non-emergency calls are responded in a way that makes sense, that continues to keep our community safe, whether they are psychologically related or not. How can we make the most efficient use of our deputies' time? I think that's important for us to really take a strong look at. So, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Spriggs.
Yes, I wanted to add very much along the same lines that when you talk to the deputies, they would rather not have to respond to things that are really outside of their area of expertise. That's one point. Second point is on July 6th, a large number of elected officials from around the county, including myself and our mayor, were on a call with Sheriff Gore and his senior leadership team to talk about matters such as sheriff services, use of force, etc. And one of the points that Sheriff Gore himself made that I think is going to be something we can press for more at the county level is he said there are way too many people in, quote, his jail, that is the county jail system, that are really mental health cases as much as they are criminal cases. But there is the system for dealing with these kinds of cases in the county, and he said our country is not really up to what it needs to be. We just haven't valued as a society addressing the needs of people who are troubled and not innately or inherently criminals, but just, are having their own mental difficulties. And a lot of our homeless issues are related to that. A lot of the sheriff's calls are related to that. And he's acknowledging that fact and saying that it would be better if we made the investments. He's essentially saying it would be better if, as a society, we made investments in alternative services. So to me, this isn't just an Imperial Beach problem. This is a county and a state and probably a national problem in terms of where we put our resources and who we value as people and how we want to deal with different social problems. And we have, as a country and as a state and as a county, a law enforcement first focused approach. And this very dialogue that we're having today is examining, in our report, this whole process is examining whether there are better alternatives for the right kinds of situations in our community that will both make more effective and efficient use of the sheriff's services and hopefully reduce our costs as a city as well. So I just wanted to add that larger context, including Sheriff Gore's comments themselves. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Spriggs. And I'll move on to this last section of the presentation. First, I want to thank the Sheriff's Department. As everyone knows, I've been fortunate to have a very good relationship with the Sheriff's Department. They've been very responsive to me, and I think they do a great job in our community, and I think are open to improvement, like hopefully we all are. And we all want to improve as we go through life. So I asked them for some very specific information, and I want to be very specific that these were their answers so that people can understand exactly what the sheriff is giving to us in response to some of our questions. So we asked about the use of force calls that they have versus the complaints that are filed with the Sheriff's Department. And their response was, the Sheriff's Department does not analyze this data by city. It is captured as a department, which includes all sheriff's operations. And so for us to be able to understand what's happening in the city of Imperial Beach, we may have to do some different digging or go through some different processes to be able to find that out. But that was an important question that was asked at our last meeting. So I just wanted to make sure to let everyone know that I am following your questions and asking them of the sheriff and trying to get you some responses. The next item was, do you have any data on racial and ethnic breakdowns of stops, arrests, and handcuffing and other use of force? And these are the responses that I received from the San Diego Sheriff's Department. The data is not recorded by contracting city employees as a, I'm sorry. The data is not recorded by contracted city employees as a standalone document. The data by geographic area includes all stops in that area made by large agencies and different operational entities that may conduct operations or investigations there. The data complies with the California Racial and Identity Profiling Act. It is comprehensive and goes beyond vehicle and pedestrian stops to include all arrests, detention, and searches. Handcuffing is not defined as force, and incidents of handcuffing are not currently collected as an independent data source. Anyone handcuffed would be included in the data because handcuffing is considered either detention or an arrest. And I believe this is the last one, but how is use of force defined? Does it include handcuffing on the curb? The sheriff's response, the Sheriff's Department is currently revising our use of force policy to include intervention and the removal of the carotid restraint as a force option. Handcuffing is not considered a use of force. The practice of asking individuals to sit on the curb while a deputy conducts an investigation is not considered a use of force. So one of the things that was discussed at our last meeting was, is there a disconnect between what the Sheriff's Department is defining officially as use of force and what our residents may feel is a use of force? So and part of the reason that question got so specific was there was a question, if a resident is asked to get out of their car handcuffed and sat on the curb, is that a use of force? The Sheriff's Department is not defining that as a use of force, so I hope that answers the questions that came up last time. But I know we wanted to at least start to have some discussion about if there is at all a disconnect between the use of force as defined by the Sheriff's Department and the use of force defined by our residents, so that we can pass that information on to the Sheriff's Department and maybe create policies here in Imperial Beach that we believe are appropriate in our community. So that is kind of the end of our presentation. So let me say this. I will again turn it back to the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs. Just to let you guys know, we don't have any other prepared information, so we would certainly open it up not just to the questions that may come up about use of force, but any questions in general. And then just to let you know that the Assistant City Manager has been monitoring the chat, trying to come up with some answers that have been asked through the text, and we'll take a few minutes and update you on those at any time that you would want as well. So again, thank you everyone for the Zoom meeting. It's a little bit unusual. I don't get any feedback. I'm looking into a screen and hopefully it's a little awkward, but man, it has been so nice to have people get on and share their ideas and opinions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I will caveat my comment with saying that we were hopeful to have more data available for this discussion, and from the Sheriff's Department, unfortunately, like Andy said, we don't have that data just yet. We will seek other means to acquire that data because it's very important to us to have data that's specific to the city of Imperial Beach and to our needs, our community's needs, and so that we can move forward in an informed way. Andy just very well covered what the department uses to define the use of force. For me, and for, I believe, Councilmember Spriggs, it's very important for us to understand the difference between what the department considers use of force and what the community defines as use of force, so that we can understand the lived experiences of our community members when they have encounters with our deputies. So that is certainly a discussion that I wish that we could enter into right now, so that moving forward, we can address that as well. So Councilmember Spriggs, I don't know if you have any additional comments before we open the floor to that.
Yes, I'd like to tag on to what you just said. And I'm going to be, I really am so glad we have so many participants on this call. We may or may not be able to get data from the sheriff on use of force in Imperial Beach, particularly broken down by ethnicity. We need everyone here, may not be in this meeting, but it can be by email to Andy Hall and the city clerk, who's had an experience with the sheriff that they feel was appropriate, or if they feel it was not appropriate in terms of how they were treated. We need that information from our community. And so I would invite everyone who's had interactions with the sheriff to give us some information. The more anecdotal information that we have, the more we'll be able to paint a picture from the community side about interfaces with the sheriff in the absence of sheriff willingness or ability to provide their own data to us. Now, I don't want to put Gary Brown on the spot. He has made some very useful suggestions offline, as have a lot of you. He suggested that there's been an ACLU report, or he said that there's been an ACLU report on stops, searches, and other actions by the San Diego Police Department and the sheriff, and that it's conceivable that they would have that data broken down by community. It's already broken down by race and ethnicity. So that's something, and I'm saying this is to Gary, if you have more information on that, that would be useful to the city manager and city staff. We should acquire that report and see if we can glean anything from it regarding Imperial Beach. He also suggested in another email that every sheriff deputy has to make a report regarding when they are called by dispatch to respond to a situation and they use force. Every deputy has to write a report. Gary Brown suggests that a Public Records Act request to the Sheriff's Department for such reports concerning Imperial use of force in Imperial Beach would be one way to possibly get the data that we need regarding use of force in Imperial Beach and the different circumstances. Now, we would get a whole bunch of those reports. We'd have to ask our consultants or somehow be able to go through that data and make some sense out of it. But it would be good raw material for us as we examine the question of use of force in Imperial Beach. So those are some of the suggestions that have been made for us to acquire this information. I think we need as much data from the sheriff as we can get, but in the absence of that, or in addition to it, we need anecdotal information from members of our community regarding their interface with the sheriff's department. Thanks.
Councilmember Spriggs, another possible source is the group on which one of your consultants sits. Mike Gray is a member of the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board. They, get all sorts of complaints. They might be able to sort those out just for Imperial Beach. And I'll be frank with you, having sat on the board myself, there are not that many complaints from Imperial Beach. But still, you could get, the few that have happened, and the board has been active for 10 or more years. So you might ask them, gee, could you give us the complaints in the last 2 to 3 years? And they might be able to respond in a timely manner.
Excellent. Andy, that would be something I think we would ask Mr. Gray if he could help us with. That's perfect.
Absolutely, Councilmember Spriggs. And just so you know, Mike Gray has been able to join us. So I don't know if he has some initial comments or not. He's welcome to join us if he wants. Again, there has been a request, and I think that it's important just for everyone to make sure that we are keeping this conversation where it belongs, that we probably should make sure that we identify ourselves. We all have, and that we not use pseudonyms so that people understand who they're talking with in our organization and in this meeting. The ad hoc committee members have asked that be part of this. And maybe I apologize, we didn't get a chance to go through some of the rules. I think we jumped into meeting 2 here without talking about meeting 1. Initially, what we had made sure is that the conversation we're having this morning is really for Imperial Beach residents and business owners in Imperial Beach. This is not intended to be for outside groups or outside entities. And so the ad hoc committee had asked that everyone provide their name and their either place of address or their business address so that the conversation was geared toward people here at Imperial Beach. So if people are unwilling or unable to provide us with either their name or their residence, we'll probably remove them from the meeting. So just making that clear. Mr. Gray, I don't know if you're there and you wanted to make any comment about that, or whether we can talk when we meet next week.
Hi, everybody. First of all, my apologies for getting out so late. Somehow I had it in my head it was 10 o'clock, not 9, but I'm here. I made it in a little bit late. I think that a lot of the comments that I'm hearing, a lot of the questions I'm hearing are not uncommon to any neighborhood that wants, number one, accountability from law enforcement, but wants better service and a safer community. My goal in saying yes to Andy and Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Spriggs was to help you and assist you with the areas that I'm familiar with and the areas that I think I can lend some expertise in. And I noticed, no, I'm not getting paid for this specifically, and the organization I work for is not getting paid for this work. We're doing it because we care about the community. And I think that's important to put out there. So I'm happy to be on board, and I will help Andy and the council members in any way that I possibly can to make it better for your city. I think that's important.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. We're happy that you were able to join us. Okay, so I'd like to just go back to what we had discussed earlier about having an opportunity to discuss the use of force and how that is perceived for the participants in this call. I think what Councilmember Spriggs has requested is very important to us, so that you can share your experiences with us via written comment, however those experiences might have been, it's important for us to paint that picture of how the community is perceiving those experiences. But I want to take this opportunity, since we are here, to have that conversation. How do you perceive use of force, and what types of experiences you've had? So if City Clerk Kelly, do we have any comments or requests to speak on the chat?
And let's try to keep it first priority on this issue, if we can. Sure, there may be other questions as well that have come up, but I think in accordance with what Mayor Pro Tem has said, you know, we've got to start collecting some information. This September meeting is going to be on us pretty soon, and I hope we can start getting information on community experience with the sheriff regarding the interface where there's been a stop of any kind or a call and interaction of any kind, and particularly where there's been use of force. But I think the interactions in terms of the degree of courteousness of the sheriff, I'm not trying to expand this, but you know, a lot of us have had very cordial and courteous interfaces with the sheriffs. It'd be good to know those as well, so that we have the whole spectrum of interface with the sheriff deputies in Imperial Beach as part of our record.
Very well said, Mr. Spriggs. City Clerk Kelly?
Madam Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre, there are 3 people who have already commented: Gary Brown, Marco Amaral, and Julie Barrons. Would you like to go to Marcus Boyd, who hasn't commented yet?
Yes, please. Let's give an opportunity for those who haven't had an opportunity to comment yet.
Mr. Boyd, please unmute yourself. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning and thank you. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you again, Councilmember Spriggs and Councilmember Aguirre, for putting together a meeting to discuss a very important topic that I know the council members, Mr. Spriggs has seen me bring to the council on numerous occasions. It is not new to those with their eyes open that Imperial Beach, that the Sheriff's Department's method of policing in Imperial Beach is heavy-handed. Now, that looks good to some people that like to see heavy-handedness. But when you're a community member that has done things for the school board, does things for the city council, put ballot initiatives on the ballot, when you have members that are well known that get treated like just anybody else, especially when that person had been called a racist term, you have a system that is blind in how they conduct justice when it comes to each individual situation. Now, you just talked about curbing, and you went through it as though it was not a use of force. It's not. And so let's not get bogged down with the term use of force. What curbing is inhumane. It is very, very embarrassing. And if you look closely, as I have, it's only brown people that are getting curbed. Now, the city of San Diego has stopped curbing, and I believe the sheriffs are long overdue for doing so as well. Now, there are other issues in Imperial Beach. Just recently, when COVID started, the sheriffs were not wearing masks. And I tweeted to the city, hey, the sheriffs aren't wearing masks. And that got them to wear masks, which was great. The first day that they started wearing masks, I snapped a picture of them under the iconic Imperial Beach sign on the pier. There were 2 sheriff patrol units that were parked there on the under the sign, and the sheriffs were standing under it as well. And they had masks on. And I was standing across the street at the liquor store where I was recently assaulted. I was standing across the street at the liquor store, and I snapped a picture of them. And it was it was a cool picture. But rather than them smile and wave, they walked briskly to the curb, pulled out their notepad, and bent over and made it very obvious that they were writing down my license plate in a form of intimidation. And that was just recently this year. Now, I know other people in this call have experienced wonderful relationships with them. But if you look at what they've done in Vista with that gentleman that was walking up the sidewalk and he saw his son on the ground being pummeled, and all he did was slow down, stumble to see that, and he had to walk around it because it was in his way anyway. They shoved his face into a fence and dragged it about 5 feet along the fence. You should have saw the result of his face. The man himself had not committed any crime other than being frustrated with sheriffs barging into his house. Now, the district attorney found that that was okay. The sheriffs found that that was okay. And that will be okay here in Imperial Beach. But that's not okay with people anymore. So things like that have to change. People, they need to treat people with respect, irregardless of what they look like. And they need to know the community. They don't. You don't barge into a person's business and treat them the way they treated me without having a problem in your system. Now, there are other issues as well, but I think I'll leave it with that people need to realize that there are issues. If you don't believe that there are, then do not be in this conversation, because it's not about there's not issues. There are issues. And they are local. One other major issue that the city knows and has talked about through this meeting and should be frustrated with, which is what I am, is the lack of transparency. You can't tell me that they don't have that information, sir. That is wrong. You know that that is wrong. I am on the weekly press board, where I receive all of the incidents reports that happen in Imperial Beach, and they're broken down by category. Some time ago, they took off race, which used to be on there. However, they've taken that information off. The information is clearly printed from a database. I'm also a database engineer, just so you know. So it's printed from a database from Imperial Beach. So you can't tell me that that information cannot be collated in seconds and provided to you. The only reason it's not, I'm going to tell you why it's not, is because it glaringly shows racism in policing. I will end with that. Thank you.
The next person is Gary Brown.
Thank you, Jackie. As Mayor Pro Tem pointed out, 50,000 non-emergency calls. It's a high number. I'm just wondering if we have analysis that shows how many calls may be classified initially as non-violent and then turn violent, and vice versa. If initially we have calls that appear to be violent, and when an officer gets there, may be non-violent. On the former type of case, I've often heard that a domestic dispute can be one of the most dangerous types of calls a deputy can go to. And, I'm just trying to think, if we substituted a psychologist for that domestic dispute, would the psychologist feel threatened if the situation becomes violent? Or what hazard do we put a psychologist in? What hazardous situation a psychologist may be in if the psychologist were not accompanied by a deputy? So I don't have any answers to those questions, but I'm just throwing them out as something that we may want to look at. Thanks.
Next up is Marco Amaral. Please unmute yourself. Mr. Amaral?
Yes, sorry. I first wanted to state that I think yes, it's important to see what our interactions with with our local sheriff's department has been, but I think it's a fallacy, and I think it would be incorrect for us to not see who the sheriff's department is in San Diego County as a whole, because at the end of the day, the San Diego Sheriff's Department here is the same San Diego Sheriff's Department everywhere, and they have discretion where anywhere the San Diego Sheriff's Department can be in. So with that being said, I first wanted to start with saying the names of some people whose lives have been lost here in San Diego due to their interactions with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. James Lacey, Marshawn Washington, Earl McNeil, Jonathan Cornell, David Lopez, Shane Hayes, Jose Malacara, Gary Kendrick, Simone Hubble, Sergio Wick, Mark Atkins, Michael Napier, Jerome Kudwinder, Isidro Bazan, Frederick Jefferson, Nicholas Bills, Bernard Victoriana. Many of these cases, there have been findings of wrongdoings from police officers, and these police officers, such in the case of Earl McNeil, still have a job today, even after there have been findings of wrongdoing. This is the San Diego Sheriff's Department. Now, let me speak from my own experiences with the San Diego Sheriff's Department, Imperial Beach branch. As many people know, it's no secret, I'm a long time activist for over 10 years now when it comes to issues of liberation and justice. And I've had several interactions with the San Diego Sheriff's Department, and the Imperial Beach one in particular. The one that speaks to me the most is the one where 2.5 years ago, and I'm sorry, this is a little bit difficult for me to talk about because these experiences for someone like me that has no criminal record, that has never had any incident of violence against a police officer. I've been beaten up by the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. I've had rifles pointed at my head by the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. So this next experience is difficult. I acknowledge that I come to many spaces such as an activist, and I wear that hat with pride because I understand my personal role and the roles of people like me in this society. 2.5 years ago, Trump came down to San Diego to begin his project of building the wall. He was going to arrive off the 905 freeway, and myself and another roughly 20 friends, activists, comrades went out there to protest peacefully Trump's unwelcoming visit. And there was a group of maybe 4 times as many Trump sympathizers, supporters, or activists, pro-Trump activists. When we got there, the San Diego Sheriff's Department immediately corralled us, literally with batons in hands and their hands on their guns. They corralled a group of 20 people, and then they allowed the Proud Boys, they allowed members of Patriot Fire, they allowed other Trump sympathizers to come into the circle with weapons, with batons, with sticks. We had nothing on us but our voices, our hands, and some signs. And they allowed a group of about 15 Trump supporters to come into the circle that we were being corralled in. And the San Diego Sheriff's Department Imperial Beach branch, allowed them to slash open the head of 3 of my friends. Luckily for me, I'm a big guy. And so I always go with my dog everywhere, Pancho. Shout out to my dog, Pancho. And so I'm pretty intimidating, especially when it comes to things like, defending myself. So I wasn't hurt, but it was evident what the San Diego Sheriff's Department was doing, which was allowing these Trump supporters to come in and do what they wanted with us. Never once did a police officer intervene, as there was Trump supporters hitting my friends on the ground, and literally opening up their heads. And it took several of us to try to break them up. And we filed a joint complaint. And to this day, there has been no justice towards that incident. We don't expect there to ever be justice towards that incident. And that's the unfortunate thing. And cases like that with activists and non-activists are, I dare to say, in the thousands. And, many people don't even file complaints against the police, including the sheriffs, because they know it's a frustrating, long, tiring, and depressing road. And they know that they're more likely to receive intimidation from police officers than to receive any justice from our system. And I say my experience, honestly, not because I think that this forum will grant my friends and I, any form of justice. That's not why I say it. I say it so that we can understand that, yes, it is important to focus on our interactions with the counties, with the sheriff's department here locally, but let's not automatically, put a border in our minds, stating, kind of like saying, like, we are completely independent from what happens outside of Imperial Beach, because we're not. We're not at all. And that's it. I think many people have suffered, have died, and continue to go through really mental, psychological, emotions due to the actions of the Sheriff's Department. And I think we need to come at that from that focus, from what has happened to actual victims. Because honestly, we can talk about, oh, I had a great interaction with this police officer, and this police officer, saved my puppy, and this police officer, served these kids meals, right? But when you do that, you don't put your focus where it needs to be, which is on victims. We cannot be celebrating people for simply doing their job, right? Because that's just ridiculous, I mean, I'm not going to celebrate Council Member Paloma Aguirre for being on this meeting. It's her job to be on this meeting, right? Similarly, I'm not going to celebrate a public servant, like a police officer, right, handing some food, to some people, right? Because that's their job. They're a public servant. And so we should be focusing on the incidents of injustice, of pain, of malice. And I think from that lens is where we can get to a better world. That's it. Thank you.
The next speaker is Julie Barrons. Go right ahead, Julie. Julie?
Hold on one second.
Julie, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I could not unmute myself.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure that we're bringing the focus back to Imperial Beach and actual instances that we've had with Sheriff's Department here in Imperial Beach. And I understand that that was an incident that the individual had with the Sheriff's Department, not in Imperial Beach, but as far as instances in Imperial Beach is what we need to be focusing on. And as far as my input for, you know, curbing, as you want to call it, I do not think that it is a use of force at all. I think that it's absolutely necessary and a necessary part of any law enforcement officer's job to contain an individual while they're doing their job and doing their search so that they protect themselves. I don't think it has to be demeaning. I think that people can often perceive it as being demeaning. But at the end of the day, it's a necessary precaution that they need to do their jobs. So that's my input there. As far as any and all interactions that I personally had with the Sheriff's Department here in Imperial Beach, which I have had many, as far as working with them or basically calling them to deal with any of the drug-related issues or the crime-related issues in our city, which, you know, I could go on. There was a prostitution ring that was just basically happening right outside my front door, and new condoms being left every single day that would wash up on my front lawn. So it's not just, you know, drugs that are issues here in Imperial Beach. There are other issues, and there have been a lot of collaboration between the Sheriff's Department and myself, and they are always respectful. They are always responsive, and my interactions with them have been very positive. So that's my input.
Please let me clarify for just one moment. When talk about curbing, I have been the recipient of a curb event where the officer on the radio, this was some time ago, this is when I was young, the officer on the radio said, "We have 2 in the curb." And then the other officer said, no, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Sir, I want to just point out the fact that this is not a debate. This is
just to remind everyone, when you're called on, you will be able to speak. The next speaker is Jennifer Almada. Jennifer, please go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. So there's so much to be said with this meeting, and all I can seem to determine is the fact that we are so divided, and I'm not understanding where the consulting is going to be able to communicate, or there's any type of plan to get between the divisiveness between the different viewpoints. I haven't heard anything about that, because when somebody considers a criminal as one thing and somebody else considers a criminal and even a criminal act as another, how are we going to be in consensus that everything's up to par on everybody's point of view? I don't understand how the consultants are going to want to change anything without understanding the people's point of view. So in that regard, I wanted to know what's the plan going forward and that's going to try and bridge this gap so that we could live as a community and all respect each other and respect the rules and the laws, that they're all for everybody. Because I myself have been a recipient of pretty much all of this curbing, and I am a Latina. I've lived here in in Imperial Beach my whole life. I come from generations. I have lived here. I grew up with the stigma that I am Latina and it's going to happen. It has happened to me. I have been racially discriminated against. I've lived through multiple situations within my own school here in Imperial Beach with all, I've seen it, and I've also been curbed I have no reason to be curbed. I have no criminal record. I've had the sheriffs multiple times given me, and this is something that I think a lot of community members can agree on, is that when you're pulled over needlessly, pulled out of your car, and you keep getting tickets for things that are not necessary instead of going and fighting crime, that puts citizens and residents in a financial situation, and financial situations can lead to other things. So not respecting the fact that people can't always pay for little things. I mean, I've had my lights were tinted and I've gotten pulled over for that. And I mean, okay, I don't need to pay $300 for a lights tinting. That's ridiculous. And those kind of things put financial stress on people. I think that needs to be also addressed. But yes, if we could find out more information on how these consultants are going to bridge this gap of miscommunication, divisiveness, and lead us to actual goals and just a whole plan, a smart plan, measurable, all of that. Thank you.
As a reminder, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand. If you are participating via computer or iPad, if you are participating by phone, you can enter *9, and that will raise your hand.
Jackie, this is Councilmember Spriggs. To the last comment made by Jennifer Almada and any others, what we're trying to do is gather information at this point, community views, all the different perspectives. They're all valid. And we're trying to gather information from the sheriff. And we've reported on how those are mixed results so far. We're going to keep trying to do that. There are other sources of information we're going to try to pursue. And what is going to happen is we're going to have to sort through this information to come up with how several things. On the question of use of force and sheriff's activities in Imperial Beach, we are going to have to come up with our own composite view of that the best way that we can. So all of the input that we're getting is useful to us compiling it, eventually compiling it and coming up with a report that may or may not be able to make firm recommendations to the City Council for next steps in September when we present our report. So it's not something that we can solve right now. The purpose of this committee of Mayor Pro Tem Gary and myself is not to resolve all of our community issues. We know there are differences of opinion throughout the community. That's just the way it is in our community, and that's the way it is everywhere. We know that different people have had different experiences with the sheriff. That's all what we're trying to understand better. So let's just keep in mind what we're trying to accomplish here, and that's over the next few weeks, gather as much information as we can on the topics that the 3 different topics that we've looked at, sheriff services and contract and ways to be more economical, alternatives to sheriff services, and use of force, and whether we need to make any recommendations regarding that. One further comment I'd like to make is that Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre and I have already met with, way before this even started or was even considered by the City Council back in June. We met with Lieutenant Marquez here in Imperial Beach to begin a dialogue on policing by the sheriff in Imperial Beach, to make sure that we understand what the approach is, and that he understands our concern that everyone be treated equally in Imperial Beach, regardless of their social status or ethnicity or whatever. And that's really what we're after, is an understanding with our local sheriff, our sheriff's representative, of the kinds of practices that we as a community expect in this community of the sheriff. We may not be able to change overall policies right away, but we are concerned about how our citizens in Imperial Beach receive services from the sheriff and public safety in Imperial Beach and how it's administered. So that's really all that we're trying to do, is gather the facts, see if there are any patterns that emerge, and move forward with a report. and everybody's contributions of information on how they have interfaced with the sheriff, for better or for worse, is part of the process of gathering information, and then we'll sort through it and reach some recommendations. We're not going to sort through it and come to any conclusions now. That's going to require a lot more data gathering and information gathering from the sheriff and from the community and from other sources. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Councilman
Thank you,
Spriggs.
Councilmember Spriggs. If I may just add to that, very well put. This is going to take time. This is a whole process. This is the first step of many steps to come. We are trying to gather this information from our community, from all of you, from your lived experiences. And just as a reminder, what is true for some may not be true for others. And what your personal lived experiences are quite valid. And that doesn't mean necessarily that it is not true for others. So I just want to remind everybody of that. And yes, it is a divisive issue, if you will, because of all these different perspectives and different lived experiences that our community members have for whatever reasons. But it is going to take time. So right now we're just gathering this information. We are one of the first cities to do this. We have a very strong interest in understanding our community, and we have this opportunity to renew the sheriff's contract in a few weeks, unlike many of our sister cities around the region, which is why we're focusing locally. I just want to also remind everybody that at a regional level, we will be looking at this as well, because it is the interest of many other contracting cities to go through this process as well, except that they may not have that same opportunity because they have probably just renewed their contract recently. So just to remind you all that is something that's going to take time, and that is going to be an ongoing process and an ongoing effort that won't be resolved by September 16th when we're having our next council meeting, and it is something that we'll have to do together. So thank you for your comments, Mr. Spriggs, and I'll turn it over to Andy. Thank you.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, we do have a couple of other questions, but I don't get to see all of you on the screen like some others do, and the city clerk is telling me that some of you are doing jumping jacks trying to raise your hand. So what I think I should probably do is let everyone know that when we say raise your hand, if you go into the buttons there, as you hover over the buttons, there's one called participants. And if you click on participants, in the lower right-hand corner, there's a phrase there that says raise hand. That's the raised hand we're talking about. So I really apologize. We should have probably explained that a lot earlier. But we'll get to the people who have raised their hands. Oh, and then if you're on the phone, it is *9, and that will indicate to Jackie that you would like to make a comment. So we'll get to those couple other hands that have been raised. And then the assistant manager has been going through the chat, trying to consolidate different questions. There's several questions about the same thing. So she's tried to consolidate those into some major headings that we could try to answer. And then we have about 3 or 4 comments that have been emailed in. So we'll try to get to those after the hands that have been raised. So I'll turn some time back over to the city clerk.
Thank you. The next speaker is Allison Hoover. Please go ahead.
Hi, this is a comment and then a follow-up by a question. I fully respect everybody's views that are participating in this meeting today, and I just want everybody to understand that this is going to take time, and I also recognize this. On the comment about curbing, there are other organizations that utilize the technique of, instead of having somebody sit where everybody can see them, if it's a hot day or not the best weather or whatever, they utilize putting people into their patrol cars. And already our sheriffs, when they are on a call or a stop, they leave their vehicle running with that nice air conditioner or whatever. I just would say that it could be a less demeaning option, just having the person nicely sit in the car, explain to them this is what we do for everybody, and then it be a blanket option. Because I know that some people have been saying, oh, I've never had this, but some other people said I've had this. And I would like to say, as a person, an Imperial Beach citizen, I've been pulled over coming out of grocery outlet by a sheriff that saw me putting my seatbelt on, so I hadn't had it on. I was about 3 weeks postpartum, and it was the first time going out, and I lost it. I started crying, and the officer didn't want to deal with it, didn't have to hear anything I had to say. He just took my belligerence and had me sit out in the front. So now I'm belligerent, upset, running late, having a bad day. And things happen. You follow the rules and everything, it's fine. But at the same time, I was already in a negative space. And the officer had no cares in his mind about what was going on with me, just did his job. And that's a respectful thing. But I think that what I would like to bring up to everybody is that one of the conversations I think we need to have is that as having a community involved policing, they should be concerned about their community. They should take the time to ask questions on how are you doing? You know what I mean? I mean, it's hard to say, you know what I mean, to a group of people, but that's my statement. And then my question was, are we going to be really trying to find a way to utilize PERT in our sheriff's department? Thank you.
Yeah, just Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs, I just wanted to answer that real quick. Yes, I've actually had conversations with Commander Brown about an increased use of PERT in our community. I think that you will see that across the county. I think that that is becoming really important, especially right now. We're all dealing with a circumstance and a situation that we literally haven't seen before. Most of us weren't alive in 1918 to deal with the last worldwide pandemic. And so this is affecting a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And so there has been an increase in concerns with mental illness, mental health. And so, yeah, the Sheriff's Department understands that there are some different circumstances we're dealing with now. So that's a very good question. And yes, we're going to do everything we can to increase that type of service in our community.
The next speaker is a caller. Number last 3 digits 773. Please identify yourself and you may speak. Caller with the last 3 digits of 773, you may speak after identifying yourself.
I don't know if that's me. I don't think that's my number.
Yes, Michael,
Am I
it's
unmuted?
you. Yes, you are.
Okay. I don't see a 773. Okay. Anyway, I'm Michael Carey. Lived in IB for about 30 years. I have 2 things. One real quick comment that I saw the article in the paper today about the tax, the proposed tax thing that's going to go on the ballot. And I just would like to encourage that the results and all the studies and everything that we're doing be also directed in that way to help communicate to the community what that proposed increase in taxes would be about, especially if it's related to public safety and the things that we're doing. So there's kind of a confidence that what that's supporting. Anyway, we're going to do a lot of good work, and it should feed into that. But the thing I want to talk about, I'm 74, and I go back to a long, long time ago. I was worked with the farm workers with the Cesar Chavez, and I worked on strikes in the field and the workers there. And in the context of doing that, I lived with them. I was on the picket lines. I was, not exactly one of them. I was always a gringo, but I was, I got a real good understanding of how they were treated and understanding how different it was in that, pretty obvious context. One of the things that the recent protests in the Black Lives Movement has brought up for me is the issue of systemic. That there are things that I, as a, whatever you want to call me, a white person, do not experience, but also do not feel and sometimes cannot see. And I think that's becoming bothersome to a lot of people in the country, not only those that are the recipients of the racism, but also those of us who exist and have it, within us in ways that we don't understand and recognize, both because it doesn't necessarily focus on us, come to us, but also just that we're supportive. And what's becoming a real clear thing is if you don't speak out and you don't take some active measures to deal with it, I don't know if you go strong, but they do. That's at least a racist tendency in you, a racist something. And one of the things that I see coming from all of this is an education thing for myself and for people like me to understand and to feel what it feels like. That I'm very moved when I hear them talk about the conversation that fathers have to have with their sons when their sons go out on the street, that a person like myself would never have to have. So what I'm saying on this is I don't know how to incorporate it into the overall process, although I do understand that Keisha Clark is involved in that kind of, it's almost a kind of sensitivity training. And I don't know if it would be in a meeting or something as an adjunct to this, an invitation to some sort of a process like what we're doing here, but maybe on the side. That would help to be a dialogue, but also to help me understand what it means to be privileged and be a part of this systemic system, and to dialogue, and that can be done in some parts by someone saying, well, this is what happened to me. Mark is talking about what happened to him and some other kind of things, but there are other ways to do that in a dialogue to help those of us who are a part of that system from a different point of view understand what's going on. So anyway, I would like to encourage, and this would be something that I think, and maybe she could comment on it, that Keisha Clark could help us with and help make available as a part of, or at least an adjunct to this system, some sort of processes to help there be a dialogue, but also help someone like me understand the racist tendency in myself. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. And if Keisha has anything to say about that, I would like to hear it.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for unmuting me. And thank you, Michael Carey. Yes, this is something that I actually was helping my friend get ready for a video interview for a diversity chief position for a global company. And one of the questions was about how do you create diversity and inclusion initiatives in an organizational wide. And I've actually had an opportunity to begin doing that with the county. And we all know that we have 18,000 employees there. And I've been given a platform to begin talking about some of the things Michael was raising. When we talk about diversity, we talk about privilege, we talk about unconscious and implicit bias. I think that's where Michael Carey was really getting to when we begin to share. And I'm watching the comments as well. And I heard the caller talk about division, where some people feel this way and some people feel that way. And the thing about inclusion is that we need them all. I think Councilman Spriggs said that whether it's a popular or unpopular, just because the majority agrees with something doesn't mean it's the right thing. And neither the minority. We all need it. It's a inside job, and it's for all of us to do. Definitely training and education is something that I'm hoping that when we are making proposals or recommendations for this report, that it is included. I heard someone also talk about the sheriff's minimal training, and I don't know which area they're talking about, whether that's in weapons or whether that's in mental health or things like that. But I do want to speak to the PERT team as well. I've heard a lot about that. I serve on the committee of the cultural response team, and we partner with PERT, and we've had the director of PERT come in. actually around an event you may remember with the El Cajon shooting of a man, an East African man. And it was really close to one of the County of San Diego Family Resource Centers, our FRC. And this person was called on, I think the sister called because this person was in crises. And many times mental health can get exacerbated. And so, thank you, his name, Alfred Alongo. Thank you, Marco. And he was shot, and we had questions about, and we partnered with East African organizations, community-based organizations and nonprofits to speak with their community and connect with their community about what happened here. And we had questions for our PERT director. And so when we talk about PERT, I saw some ideas about, you know, maybe they're not close enough to IB and things like that. And I think I responded privately to someone when they talked about PERT that one of the problems with PERT that we had, that committee, was that there were blackout areas where PERT doesn't respond to certain neighborhoods. And digging in the data, seeing which neighborhoods are being quote unquote redlined as not safe enough, or clinicians didn't feel safe enough. I guess even with law enforcement protection, which again caused us to continue to look and dig deeper, because we thought this was a partnership between law enforcement and clinicians. So they're there, the law enforcement, and this is our perceived protection. However, clinicians still did not feel comfortable and safe enough, even with a law enforcement officer accompanying them, to go to certain neighborhoods. And so there was a decision made that certain neighborhoods are blacked out, and most of them are ones that needed the most. And so we talked about, and maybe my counterpart consultant can talk about, Mike Gray can talk about some of the training that came out of there. I became certified in mental health first aid, and I have done trainings with law enforcement officers on that front. And then they began to talk about something the county purchased, a simulation type of device of some sort that I was to also volunteer to provide a Black woman. We mixed in cultural competence, mental health, and communication. For instance, our behavioral director at that time, she began to describe to the PERT director, she's Latina, and she began to say, just because I talk with my hands and I'm expressive, she did this motion, if you can see me on video, doesn't mean I'm violent, doesn't mean I'm a threat. And when we found that, different communication styles provoke certain responses in law enforcement as they answer different calls. And again, this could be, again, unconscious and implicit. When we see people curbed, and if you see most people that are curbed, you know, are Black or brown, you begin to, yeah, it can be traumatic, and it can give a view of from the neighborhood. When I see these types of people being curbed, these are people, unfortunately, our mind takes those shortcuts and says that's a bad person, must have been breaking the law, not obeying, you know. And so we begin to paint the picture of the brown and the Black people or people of color as something's wrong here. And so again, giving lots of cultural competence trainings and things like that to law enforcement about even our East African, of course, and then Arab families, Middle Eastern, and the way that they interact with law enforcement. And the general district attorney at the state level, federal, I think, put out something about responding to Middle Eastern families and how, you know, their actions, their communication, their style of communication, not giving direct eye contact, maybe shifty, maybe eyes moving back and forth or looking around, very paranoid and things like that, doesn't mean guilt that they've done something wrong, but it could be many other factors. But we begin to develop our picture, our narrative of what this is. And so the simulation was supposed to help officers to respond to different cultures and their communication style. And then there was a mix of mental health, what would we do? And some of those things were, if we're going to have 2 officers, we'll have 2 officers respond, the one engaging someone with mental health. And I know we're trying to pull back from having officers even respond to mental health, but this was back then, that the one engaging the person with the issue would be, unarmed or not, doesn't have any lethal force needs to be used, while the one that is armed would be kind of the lookout, making sure the situation, observing the environment, and taking cues where if there needed to be force, then they would be the person that would engage in that way if that was needed. And so we just talked about different models to really deconstruct what happened and to mitigate that happening again. But there was, as you can imagine, many complexities. As many of you said, this is not going to be solved in our 4 meetings left or 3 meetings left by September 16th. And the consultants won't be able to do that for you either, as you talked about. It is a discussion, and the input of all is very important. But I definitely believe that education piece is important. I want to mention 2 other things. Speaking with City Manager Andy, he talked about, his reaction he thinks he would have if he was stopped merely for a traffic thing, a broken tail light we talked about, and that he was asked to get out and sit on a curb or be handcuffed while they investigate. Like that would put him somewhere. And I think that I answered him in that some people of color think that is the normal, that's the norm. That's not like, what? Why do I have to get out for a tail light? Why do I have to sit on a curb and so for some people, not even knowing their right, that this is the protocol, because this is what I see on the news, on movies, this is the way it's handled. This must be a policy, right? But others that know this isn't their policy, the way they walk through life, this never happens to this person, sees that as maybe egregious. And so, yes, training and education. And the last thing I'm going to say is after we talked about education, because I know that the other consultant is also in training and education as I am, the accountability piece. And we didn't even touch that in the scope of this particular time. So there's going to be more because we don't even have that in there as far as accountability, where we may have the policies here, but are they actually happening in practices? And when that is violated, how are people being held accountable? Are they being held accountable? So yes, that implicit bias, those unconscious bias trainings and dialogues and conversations where we can share with one another, even as a community, our lived experience and accept one another's lived experience is definitely something that I think is important to add to the conversation. So thank you so much, Mr. Carey.
This is Assistant City Manager Cortez. If there's no additional comments made by Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Spriggs, I can go ahead and read some of the comments that have been in the chat. I'm going to start with the one that they're asking if they can contact City Manager Andy Hall. In order to contact the City Manager, you can either email ibmanager@imperialbeachca.gov. Again, I will repeat, ibmanager@imperialbeachca.gov. We will also put the email address on the chat group. The next question is, can we share the sheriff's use of force policy if there's a copy?
Yeah, Erica, just so you know, we do have a copy of the Sheriff's Department use of force policy. And what we can do is make sure that that is available on our website. And so when we posted this meeting on the website, we will post the use of force policy as well.
I'd like to add a footnote to that, just as a sort of point of information regarding this process that we're going through. All the sheriff's policies are a matter of public record, and we can make them available to anyone. The issue with use of force policy, as with their training policies and other aspects that are written procedures and policies, is the difference between those policies and their practices, actual practices in the field. And this is one of the things that we are trying to address, is whether or not there is a distinction between their actual practices in the city of Imperial Beach when it comes to use of force or other treatment of citizens in interacting with the sheriff, and their policies. So just want to make that distinction. That's why we're trying to do some fact gathering here on the actual practices as opposed to policy, so that we can make that comparison, and that may be part of what goes into our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Spriggs. The next question is, how much consultants being paid?
So the city council set aside some funding for the consultants, and we have offered to provide compensation to them. Mr. Gray is essentially employed by the cities through the government trading agencies, so he will be doing that as part of his role as the executive director. In terms of our agreement with Dr. Clark, that has not, do not have that signed yet. And so I will be running that through with the ad hoc committee members and the larger city council members. So it's a little premature to answer that question, but I should be able to answer it by our next meeting.
The next question came up a few times actually, and in consultation with the city manager, we don't have the data right now, but it's relatively easy to gather. And like Mr. Hall said, we will post information on the website, and we can include this, and we'll also highlight it at our next meeting. The question is overtime costs. I've indicated earlier that the overtime cost is not part of the amount we provided through the presentation. So they want to know how much we spent in OT, overtime, in 2019 and 2012. So we'll make sure to gather that information and present it via the website and highlight it at the next meeting. The next two questions, I'll combine them because they go side by side a little bit. Are the deputies in Imperial Beach rotated to other jurisdictions? And the next is, are any other cities exploring similar initiatives and having similar meetings?
So that the sheriff's department is the county sheriff's department, and yes, the personnel is moved around. For example, the station commander here will usually only be in Imperial Beach for 2 or 3 years, and then they will be given a different command or promoted or some other job in the sheriff's department. The deputies tend to stay a little bit longer, but they are county personnel, and they do move once in a while. So yeah, they're assigned to Imperial Beach, and sometimes they stay here for many years, and sometimes they're here for a short period of time, and then they're given another assignment by the county. I'm sorry, what was the second part?
Are other contracted cities exploring similar initiatives or having similar meetings?
I'm not aware of any of the other contracting cities that are having this communication directly with their residents the way our ad hoc committee is. But I know that in our city manager meetings, these are topics of discussion that come up on a regular basis.
Okay, the last question and comment that I captured through the chat, and I'm sorry if I missed them. There was a lot of communication going back and forth among some of the panelists, so feel free to raise your hand or press *9 if you would like to speak. Can we have a group of volunteers to help collect data? There was an ongoing discussion about a community survey. I'm sorry I missed the name of the person who initiated the chat, but again, I provided this email for the city manager, IB manager at imperialbeachca.gov. If you're listening to this, feel free to email Mr. Hall for any additional details so we can understand some of the feedback. Mr. Hall, those are the only. Oh yeah, absolutely. Mr. Hall was just also reminded me that on our homepage, there is a tab for Join the Conversation. It's short for JTC. There's also an opportunity there to provide comments, which are relative to the discussion of today. Mr. Hall, those are the only comments that I have on the chat. I do have comments to read that came in via email. Would you like me to proceed? He's nodding yes. So I will start. First comment comes from Gary Brown. Mayor Pro Tem Aguirre and Councilmember Spriggs, I urge you to consider supporting AB 1185, which will enable a county to create a sheriff's oversight board with subpoena Duces TECOM powers. I have no idea what subpoena Duces TECOM means, but I assume lawyer Councilmember Spriggs does, and establish an office or inspector general with subpoena powers to assist the supervisors with its supervisory duties. Then he provides a link for the legislation. Creating an oversight board isn't notable for San Diego County because the Citizens Law Enforcement Review Board already exists. Perhaps AB 1185 may clarify its subpoena powers, but allowing the Board of Supervisors to create an Office of Inspector General is noteworthy because the lines of authority and responsibility are often obfuscated when an elected body, the Board of Supervisors, tries to govern an elected official, the sheriff. Please study this matter and consider supporting its passage in legislature. Second written comment from Jennifer Almada. Not all applicants have an opportunity to interview. I'm sorry, I missed this. I missed the first part. How are the committee members choosing the consultant with transparency and adequate interviewing? Not all applicants had an opportunity to interview. How many applied and how many were interviewed? What are the parameters used when choosing a candidate? Will this be released to the community? I'll take a moment so Mr. Hall can answer that question.
So there were approximately 4 people that had expressed interest in providing consulting services to the ad hoc committee. The ad hoc committee, again, as much as anything, because we have limited time to be able to complete this task, they did get a chance to review all of those who had submitted information and chose the ones that they felt like had the skill set that would help us move through this rapidly. And so that's how those consultants were chosen. Again, they are offered a professional services agreement, and so there were no interviews conducted. They are just providing professional services like an engineer or or something like that would do. The decision making rests with the ad hoc committee. The report will be a report of the ad hoc committee, not from the consultant. So I want to make that real clear. I'll just restate that. The ad hoc committee is creating this report. They are getting assistance from the consultants. The consultants will not produce the report.
Next written comment Carissa Hackworth. Apologize for if I didn't pronounce the last name correctly. Hello, and thank you for taking comments of what us citizens would like to see change in the Sheriff's Department. I would like to see more mental health crisis sort of response team, as well as homeless assistance and aid for rehabilitation and or mental health aid. I imagine some sort of central triage call areas where citizens can call regarding an emergency, and to appropriate persons would be discharged to the location. A collaboration effort between the Sheriff's Department, mental health departments. I would like to stop seeing what looks like frivolous use of Sheriff's budget by sending out no less than 3 cops vehicles to calls on a street corner where young adults 17 to 20 years of age are coloring with chalk. One was even dressed like Peter Pan. Surely there is better as of local police than that. I am a situation like that where someone calls in because they don't like the said chalk drawing. It seems a negotiator trained in dispute or confrontation with some sort of counseling degree would be better served in a situation like that. Not 3 cop vehicles parked in the middle of the street looking intimidating at the whole thing. A conflict resolution person could assess the obvious, non-threatening, non-violent situation and maybe help diffuse any hard feelings. Anyway, my comment is to have a team of various experts that would work collaboratively with the Sheriff's Department so the correct help would get to the correct people. Next comment, Danielle Richardson. It has come to my attention that there is still a lot of racism in Imperial Beach and throughout our nation. I think Angela Davis said it best, quote, "In a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist," unquote. Let us listen closely to the calls for police reform. It is a cry for help and we must respond accordingly. And the final comment, written comment, comes from Lauren Groff. Crime rates in IB are low. I think now it is time to safely decrease the number of sheriffs in IB. I reviewed the public record of calls sheriffs responded to during a 2-week period of July. There were only 25 cases during this time, and they were non-violent. Most cases were regarding intoxication, possession of paraphernalia, or controlled substance and vandalism. I don't think we need so many sheriffs to handle this small workload. I think sheriffs shouldn't patrol. They should only come when called, like the fire department. I don't want to pay for sheriffs that are hunting people. There's additional comments that came in the chat. One moment while we sort through them.
This is Ed Spriggs. I just wanted to ask our city staff whether they can preserve all of the chat comments as well as the email comments so that we can pull out of those comments the ones that deal with personal, they're all valuable comments, but we particularly need the comments that deal with interface with the sheriff, personal experience with the sheriff deputies. That's one of the things that we need. There are many other things. So that we can follow up with those individuals if they'd be willing to get a more detailed statement. I think that's something we really need to be able to do at this point if we want to gather the anecdotal evidence that goes along with whatever data we can get from the sheriff. Thanks.
Yes, I've been informed that we can do that, and I have to take this minute just to, I think, laugh at the assistant city manager. What you guys don't see, the way our system is set up, there's about a 2-second delay in what you're saying and then you're hearing it in your ear. And so it is very difficult. So if you hear us stammering over our words, it's unique, but it allows us to record this and allows us to have this meeting live, which I think is worth the stammering a little bit. So thank you very much for putting up with these Zoom technology challenges.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Let's see, I captured 2 questions that came in, and then before I read the chat, there was a raised hand by Trey who signed off, but apparently might have came back. Trey, if you can hear us, please unmute yourself. Again, we saw him earlier raise his hand. However, when we were prompting him to speak, he disappeared from our window. Okay, we can come back to him. There is a, there's like a few other comments that I was able to capture from earlier. The other comment in the chat is from Paul Lasso. Question: I can't help but notice that crime was dropping as the economy was recovering from the Great Recession. Is there any data on the relationship between increased job opportunity in IB and the crime rate? If there is a link, how can we make sure that we can support our residents financially so they don't feel the need to commit crimes of poverty or desperation? And then there was a comment about, can the City Council pass a resolution that all deputies working at our substation receive a full free 3-day training from PERT? And who will oversight the ad hoc committee?
Okay, so on those last couple of questions, the Sheriff's Department is pretty good on their training. They do require quite a bit of the psychological training for the deputies. So we can make sure that they are receiving the right kind of training. Now, it's my understanding, and so far that's been the case, any deputies that are assigned to the Imperial Beach Station are full deputies that have been fully trained. We do not have any trainees in our division, is my understanding, and in the 7 years I've been here, we have not had trainees.
The resolution.
Oh, there was a question on whether who has oversight of the ad hoc committee. That would be the mayor and city council as the whole body. So it would be the mayor and 4 members of the city council.
Okay, there's a lengthy comment from Mark Williams on use of force. Imperial Beach contracts with the sheriffs for public protection. We should not pretend or even discuss use of force policies that are exclusive to Imperial Beach. We should publish or provide a link to what the sheriff's policies are and end it at that. Clear and transparent. Any policies implemented should apply equally in the entire San Diego County and all San Diego cities and should be the same. Asking deputies to behave differently is confusing, unreasonable, and unrealistic, maybe even dangerous. My preference would be to have universal statewide policies and wishfully nationwide policies. State leadership and Congress would have to act. Until then, it's best to let the sheriff and county supervisors decide with our input. We do not need the confusion. Some of us following county health with the virus, leave it to the experts. Ms. Kelly, there is one person on the phone with raised hands, but that is the last question, comment on the chat, and then we only have one raised hand. Before we wrap it up, we want to make sure that there's no additional comments, questions, to please either raise your hand using the application in Zoom or *9 if you're on the phone, please.
Okay, this is City Clerk Kelly. We have a caller, last 3 digits, 773. please go ahead.
Must be me. That must be me. I recognize the number now. I have two questions. One, kind of a quick one. If you want to collect anecdotal evidence, what's the best way to submit that? So that's one question. And then the other one, I was out last night down by Pier Plaza, and I noticed, I mean, there are a lot of people on the street. There are a lot of people who are wearing masks and conforming, and a lot of people who aren't, and there are a lot of gatherings, etc. Is that, what does one do about that? The sheriffs, I gather, don't have anything to do with that. They're not looking for that, and they're not, I presume, not when they see it, not doing anything about it. I'm concerned where the virus is going nationally, but also in IB. I see things starting to happen that weren't happening a couple of weeks ago. And I don't know if that's in the purview of this, but what is the enforcement with, thoughts about that as that begins to happen more and more? And a lot of it's the time when people come in from out of town, so it's not necessarily local people. And I think the lifeguards do a great job on the beach of watching that, but I don't know if you want to comment on that, because the virus is getting where it's getting. Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Carey, to answer your second question first, the county health order requires masks in businesses that are essential, like grocery stores, pharmacies, some of those that are essential businesses. Both the employees and patrons must wear a mask. Then masks are strongly encouraged anytime you're in public, and especially if you are within 6 feet of another individual. And if you cannot physically distance, then you should wear a mask. Last week, the county met with the city managers to put together a team of both city employees in each city and county employees to help enforce the health orders. But it has been a challenge. It's right now, for instance, when you are in public, it is strongly recommended, but it's not required. And so what we're trying to do is, I think you've probably seen around town, we've tried to put up more signage encouraging people to wear masks. Imperial Beach does have the second highest COVID rate now in the county. I think only National City has a higher rate than we do. So yeah, we're trying to take it very seriously. The reason, again, that the road is closed down is that they have encouraged us, instead of having people eat inside of restaurants, to be able to move into the rights of way. And so we're trying to do some of those kinds of things to be consistent with what's happening in other communities, as well as consistent with the health orders. So I hope that answered your question. Madam Mayor Pro Tem, one of the things that we should probably do is make sure that we announce when we anticipate having our next meeting, and then make sure that we give you guys a chance to wrap it up. And again, I really appreciate all the comments that we get from the residents. This has been a great meeting. Sometimes they're hard to conduct. Like I say, it's hard when you kind of hear an echo in your voice, and we're trying to do this as open and transparent as possible. There's no script. So we didn't practice this meeting. We didn't practice it with each other or anything else. There's very little script. We really want to hear from the residents, and we really want to respond to questions live. But sometimes that requires the questions or the answers to be a little bit more general than you would like to your specific questions. But we are recording this. We will continue to get this data. We'll continue to dig deep into those questions, and we're answering them the best that we can off the cuff. But that's the way we want it. We don't want this to be scripted. We don't want it to be practiced. We really, really did want to hear from our residents and what's really on their minds, not have some kind of a presentation. I think that's where people get frustrated when they're talking about these issues. For instance, when we talk to the Sheriff's Department, one of the frustrations is when we meet with them is they have all the information prepared, and that's what you're told. We are truly trying to listen to all the people in the community. Our sheriffs do an amazing job. This is not about whether or not the sheriffs in Imperial Beach have been successful. They have been incredible. Our crime rate is low. Our community feels very good about the services that we get. Can they improve? Absolutely. This is about improving. This is about having very difficult conversations. A lot of cities and a lot of council members, and I know a lot of city managers would shy away from these kinds of meetings. I absolutely love them. That's why I do this job, to be able to hear from our residents and hear what they really think and find if there's ways that we can improve the community and do things better and do them more efficiently. That's what this is all about. So I just really want to take just a second and thank everyone for participating on a Saturday morning. I know everyone's busy. I want to really thank, of course, Jackie and Erica, who are here making this go on the fly. These meetings are so hard on the fly like this, and really, really appreciate them being here and helping out. So with that, I'll turn it back to the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Spriggs to kind of wrap us up.
Maybe I should go first and let the Mayor Pro Tem do the true wrap up, if that's okay. I'm really grateful for all the participants, and just about everybody has hung in here until the end, and a lot of different people have made comments, you know, verbally and writing and by email, and that's really gratifying. As said earlier, we are going to preserve all of those comments, sort through the different views, and those will be part of what goes into our findings as we do our analysis of the policies and data from the sheriff, as well as the actual experiences in the community, and looking at our financial resources, and hopefully at our next meeting, look at alternative sources of services in more detail than we have. We've not really touched that issue in depth with expertise yet. There was one question about who is the committee, this Law Enforcement Review Committee, accountable to. The committee is essentially the Mayor Pro Tem and myself. We were designated in a city council resolution as the committee and instructed to engage in a public participatory process, which is what we're doing. And we're ultimately accountable under that city council resolution to the whole city council. And I'm grateful for the support that we've gotten from our city manager and assistant city manager and all of the staff for this meeting, and the others, the previous one and the ones to come. Let's see. Anyway, I think that's probably it. Thank you very much for your participation. I think we're making a lot of progress. It may not seem like it, but these initial meetings are all about gathering information, getting a sense of where the community is, getting information from the sheriff, sifting through it, figuring out what other sources of information are out there that we need to get for the report. And I hope that by our next meeting, which should be 2 weeks from today, we will be further down the road in terms of getting more information from the sheriff and beginning to have collected and interviewed more community members about their personal experiences with the sheriff and other fact gathering approaches. So thank you very much again, and over to you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Oversight of the ad hoc. Thank you, Councilmember Spriggs. I just want to reiterate that going back to the comment about, or the question about the overview of the ad hoc, we are responsible and accountable to the rest of the council, but the council at the end of the day represents the people of ID. So we are accountable to the people of Imperial Beach. And that's why this process is so important to us, to have it be in a transparent and democratic way, operating under no assumptions and giving everyone the opportunity to express their points of views and again, their lived experiences, so that we could have a better picture, a better understanding, a granular understanding of the people of Imperial Beach, especially in the absence of data. Because as Councilmember Spriggs mentioned, we want to review the policies and the practices of the use of force and other policies of the department as well. So this is, again, going to be an ongoing process, and we are going to take all of this information and reflect on it and digest it and incorporate it into our report. That's why it's so important for us to receive your feedback, your experiences. Again, I want to remind everyone, if you can, if you'd like to share that, to email them to ibmanager@imperialbeachca.gov. So that's ibmanager@imperialbeachca.gov. And again, I want to thank every single one of you for participating today and for expressing your points of views. I especially want to thank our amazing team in Imperial Beach, Andy and City Manager Hall, Assistant City Manager Cortez, and City Clerk Kelly. Thank you so much for all of your hard work on this. The next meeting will take place, remind me please, City Clerk Kelly, it is not this next Saturday, but the one after, which is
August 15th.
Thank you so much. August 15th, and I will promise you that I will have no additional technical difficulties. So we hope to see you there. Please invite your friends, your neighbors, and my personal hope is that in addition to creating our report, in addition to presenting these points of views, is that we learn from one another. Like I mentioned, our lived experiences are not necessarily the same as others, but this is such a great opportunity to learn and to listen to one another and be able to shape our opinions in that way, in an inclusive and understanding way. So again, thank you all for spending your Saturday morning with us, and we hope to see you August 15th for our next meeting.